Can I go ahead and get confirmation that the people online can hear me? And then also confirmation that the people in the back can hear me. Okay, wonderful. Good news all around. I'll try to, if that ever changes, just holler. Let me know. All right, great. Well, welcome y'all. Welcome to the Shillapoo Habitat and Reconnection Project South. This is our public meeting on conceptual or on design concepts. This is our public meeting on how to provide public input throughout this process and how you can engage throughout this process as well. So I want to start off by saying a little bit about safety. So we have our exits are to your right in front and then behind you as well. We have restrooms in the door labeled restrooms. They're in there, and then to the right, there's also a water fountain. And then again, we have some snacks and refreshments in the back as well. So if anyone has any issues, we also have first aid and AED in this room, and then have a number of other safety pieces of equipment should anyone need it. So I wanted to start off with that. And now I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Laura Brown, and I am the Restoration Coordination Manager for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'll be presenting with
Zach Breitenstein, the Shillapoo and Mount St. Helens Wildlife Areas Manager.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. And so I'm going to kind of run through just some broad meeting ground rules. So this is for the people, well, this is actually for everybody. But so if you wouldn't mind silencing your mobile devices, make sure they're on mute or vibrate. We ask that you keep the questions and comments concise and focus on the Shillapoo and Habitat and Reconnection Project. You know, our agency does a lot of work all across the state, and there's a lot of things we could cover, but we're really trying to focus on Shillapoo Habitat. We ask that you respect each other's opinions and viewpoints throughout this whole meeting. Avoid side conversations. And we're going to ask that you hold questions until the very end in hopes that another slide later on will address a question that you might have. And then lastly, and raise your hands to speak. And another note is that this meeting is being recorded so that we can put it on the project page, which we've developed, so that anyone who's not able to attend can get all of this information and again, kind of catch up and hear about what they missed. And so that's, those are the ground rules for this. I told you it's just clicking the button. For those of you who are online, please, your microphones and your cameras will already be muted and turned off until the end of the presentation when you can raise your hand virtually. And so again, these are the icons that indicate that your microphone and camera are off. The chat function is disabled, so there's not side chatter going on. However, the question and answers will be open at the end. So when you raise your hand, Britton will find you and allow you to unmute and to turn your camera on if you wish. Also saying that you are welcome to leave your camera off while you ask questions. And just remember that the meeting is being recorded. So however you want to handle that in the virtual room, you are very much welcome to navigate that. But yeah, so that's, and if you have any questions, again, just raise your hand at the end of the presentation. All right, and so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Are there any questions on the ground rules or the technical piece from folks online? Okay, just making sure they had an opportunity before. No hand. All right, perfect. All right, thanks. All right, well, Zach, go ahead and start.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to start with kind of a brief overview of the Shillapoo Wildlife Area. I know many of you are familiar with it. But so the wildlife area is on the Washington side of the lower Columbia River estuary. It is located, pretty close to Vancouver Lake. Part of it, one unit's on the shore of Vancouver Lake, and then adjacent to downtown Vancouver. The project will be, there's 3 units of the wildlife area. You have the north unit, south unit, and Vancouver Lake unit. The proposed project will be on the south unit. And of that unit, about 50 50% of it will be affected, which is the area shaded in red there. Important to note, so it'll be 50% roughly of the south unit, but of the wildlife area of a whole, it'll be only about 20% of the entire area. Some of just kind of the abouts of the wildlife area. It's approximately 1,000 acres. There's 300 acres of wetlands on the south unit. It's popular for hunting, dog training, and birding. It's primarily managed for wintering waterfowl and native plant communities. So kind of the breakdown of the 300 acres is about 160 acres of that are inundated naturally by rain and groundwater collection. 140 acres are enhanced using a pump and water control structure. So we pump river water in and kind of flow it through a set pattern and fill up our wetlands. Some of the management is currently funded through mitigation for the impacts that the dams have caused on the Columbia River. It plays in a, I guess backtrack, I missed a few things. Anyway, it plays an important role in the Pacific Flyway, the migratory corridor for waterfowl. It's also an important site for wintering dabbling ducks. Besides waterfowl, the wildlife area supports a number of other species such as sandhill crane, Columbia white-tailed deer. We have quite a few dusky geese on the site. There's eagles, herons, osprey, black-capped chickadees. Yeah, there's mink, plenty of wildlife use that, black-tailed deer. Yeah, so that's kind of a brief overview of the wildlife area. Keeps freezing up on me. So the entire wildlife area is surrounded by a levee. As I mentioned before, the water is pumped in through the levee to flood the wetlands. And the big important thing to note with this is because of the levee or the diking system, there is no current access for salmon, and salmon had access to the area under the current conditions. Okay. Next.
Yeah, and so as Zach mentioned, there hasn't been access to the Shillapoo wetlands for salmon since it was diked off in the early 40s, 1940s time frame. And since the 1870s, over 74% of wetlands have been lost in the lower Columbia River due to diking and development. The map on the left shows habitat loss in red and yellow along the whole lower Columbia River. And so the red habitat is irrecoverable. And so what that means is that it is the Portland Airport, or it is Longview. It is, it's developed and just it's irrecoverable. And then the yellow demonstrates habitat that doesn't have that level of infrastructure on it. So that's not to say that it is not utilized in different way, whether that's agriculture or other types of wetlands, but it's recoverable in the sense that it doesn't have a heavy amount of infrastructure on it. We also know that intertidal wetlands and floodplains are critical for juvenile habitat, for juvenile salmon survival, and they allow for these juvenile fish to have off-channel access to both food and refuge as they kind of cruise down the Columbia. In this picture here on the right, it's from a study done in California on floodplains, and basically indicating that the juvenile salmon that utilize the floodplains leave the estuaries much larger and healthier than those that just use the river. And so again, really indicating that they're getting a lot of nutrients and a lot of energy supplies, and the concept being if you go out bigger, stronger, and healthier, you have a higher likelihood of coming back, right? And coming back in higher numbers. And also, so actions in the lower Columbia estuary benefit all Columbia Basin stocks. So all of the stocks coming down the river stop off in some way, shape, or form, utilizing the estuary or cruise through it. But primarily, the projects that occur in the lower Columbia River for the floodplain projects are benefiting juvenile fall chinook and chum. And so a carrying capacity study that was done at the Shillapoo Wildlife Area recently looked at the restoration project and saw that a restoration project on the South Unit could support up to 60,000 to 150,000 juvenile chinook, depending on the flow of the river. And so again, that's not saying that's how many will utilize it. That's saying that the site has the potential to hold that number of fish if reconnected. In addition to supporting salmon populations in the Columbia, this project can also benefit southern resident killer whales. So a study in 2021 stated that 50 to 100% of southern resident killer whale diets are made up of Columbia Basin salmon, depending on the season. And the endangered species listing for southern resident orcas said that perhaps one of the single greatest change in food availability for resident killer whales since the late 1800s has been the decline of Columbia Basin salmon. So this project has the potential to have benefits both locally and along the whole, Pacific Northwest. Additionally, this issue is an issue for the lower Columbia, but also it's a statewide salmon recovery issue. So WDFW has a policy stating that we must develop and implement management plans for WDFW lands with additional emphasis on habitat needs for salmon and steelhead. And so essentially this policy directs us to find solutions, find compromises, and to balance past land uses and with current habitat priorities and needs for ESA listed species. And so again, this is an overall policy across our entire state where we're working to identify ways to find solutions to keep our land uses in the way that we have historically used them and in the way that we benefit and recreate and hunt on, but also find ways to introduce salmon into the landscape on our state managed lands. And so this project sounds a little bit familiar to you. It might be because it is. So WDFW has been working to find a compromise here for a very long time. Project planning started in 2008, initiated through an MOA with the Bonneville Power Administration to restore estuary habitat as part of their mitigation for the federal hydro system. And in 2012, the South Unit became a focus. In 2016, connection alternatives were evaluated. In 2017, there were public meetings held, which many of you all may remember, and most likely were even at. And then in 2018, the project was paused due to cost, public perception, and difficulty reaching a compromise that benefited both salmon and waterfowl and wildlife. So with that project on pause for about 6 or 7 years, in 2023, the Habitat and Wildlife programs here in Region 5, we really started trying to work together on how we can incorporate our policy to, again, include salmon into our wildlife areas while still meeting the needs and the expectations that we have of our wildlife area at Shillapoo. So we started this conversation then and really feel like we've made a lot of progress in terms of thinking about this as a different project, one that really does have a multi-species benefit and kind of aligns in a way that finds compromises that we haven't proposed before. And so we've spent, honestly, since 2023, working together to incorporate what we heard in the past from all of the people who participated in their comments and in their engagement through past projects, and to come up with what we hope is a suitable compromise that will benefit both fish and wildlife. And I also want to acknowledge, too, that this meeting tonight is really to talk about how you are engaged and that decisions have not been made around the what's. And so this is not a baked project. This is really us coming to you saying, let me keep going. Oh, hold on a minute. And so we'll start by answering what is the same, right? And so the potential conceptual proposal is similar to our previous conceptual proposal, which includes breaching the levee in 2 locations, right? So of the south unit. And so the point is to introduce anadromous fish to the wildlife area, right? And so doing that includes reconnecting to the main stem. Our discussions have centered around, yes. Our discussions have centered around this elevated section, which again is the south unit wetlands, which is currently where most of the benefit from our current management occurs. And in this area, we think we've landed on a compromise to meet our project purpose. And so again, the project purpose here is to introduce anadromous fish to the Shillapoo wildlife area by reconnecting the Columbia River main stem to the historic floodplain. There's many components to this work, but our 3 focal activities are going to be reestablishing anadromous fish use, reducing invasive vegetation while enhancing native vegetation, and maintaining and enhancing waterfowl and sandhill crane use. And so again, we're really looking at this as a multi-species beneficial project with a focus on both fish and wildlife. So that may lead you to ask, what's different about this project then? And so up here, what we have is our existing conditions, if you will. So like Zach mentioned, there's a levee and we pump water up and over and onto the wildlife area and manage those wetlands for waterfowl at appropriate depths. What we have proposed previously is what's called positive drainage. And I know that that is what raised a lot of the concerns initially, right? Is that with positive drainage, when the tide goes out, the water goes out. When the tide comes in, the water comes in, and you're not really creating that same type of habitat for waterfowl. And so we've heard that. And what we're looking at is sort of this third option here with additional flexibility. And so there's a flexibility in the breach elevation. So how far down do we dig to connect to the main stem? Meaning at what point is the river is the river inundating, and at what point, do we allow fish on, and just basically how far down do we dig? There's also flexibility in targeted scrape down, and so what that means, just so short behind there, what that means is like, how can we dig the wetlands to an elevation that has the water level that's appropriate for native vegetation, inappropriate for invasive vegetation, and also help support appropriate water depths for waterfowl species, right? And the biggest piece too is keeping the topography. So this little, the ponds that are existing now, how do we keep that so that when the river does drop down, the water can stay on the wildlife area? And so we're looking at that in terms of not only, again, the flexibility in the breach elevation and targeted scrape down, but really just trying to explore options to hold water longer on the landscape at their appropriate water level for fish and for wildlife. So helping to maintain those key habitat conditions for waterfowl, sandhill cranes, while still allowing fish access. And another alternative that we've talked about is potentially even replumbing the system a little bit to allow water in times that maybe the river's not doing what it does usually, right? So there's a predicted river levels, and so maybe pumps could potentially be a backup for when the river levels are doing things that are not normal, not currently normal. And so the bottom one again is the key side. The top 2 are there for just for reference in terms of what's existing and then what was proposed last time. And then the bottom, this is where we have the flexibility and where we're really focusing on finding a compromise around elevation and holding water on the landscape. What else is different? Well, we recognize that there wasn't as much opportunity for public input initially in the first, decade of this project. And that's something that we heard and we're trying to remedy. And so we're working to develop a working group. And so that is what this meeting is for, is to basically say the working group is going to be our process for input. And so It will be a group to provide feedback to our agency as we conduct these conceptual alternative analyses, which is a tool used to evaluate a range of choices relative to a set of common criteria. The working group will connect with tribes, user groups, and stakeholders while working to share out our plans, our goals, and objectives with the broader community. Basically, this group is really going to help us identify our blind spots. What are we missing? What are we not thinking about? How can we make this better for all of the different species that we're trying to manage for across our agency? And so the working group would have special interest groups, so waterfowl hunting, recreational fishing, conservation, salmon recovery, agriculture, birding, all of the different user groups that we work with and manage lands for. And then also have ex officio members, so tribes, federal government, state agencies, local government. Obviously the neighbors are involved as well around input on the project. And so the planning process for this project has really just started. So far, we had a tribal briefing July 8th, and now we're having our public meeting tonight, July 28th. In August and September, we're going to open applications for a working group. It's 5 questions. It's not a really extensive application, but just trying to make sure that we get an understanding of who is interested, why they're interested, and if that person feels like they can be a good representative of one of those user groups, to make sure that they can report back to the user group and get input from that group. So basically using the people in the working group as a funnel for the broader community sentiment of that user group. And then, sorry, so you guys fighting over who wants to do it. And then also reviewing, so in October, November, we'll review the special interest group candidates and notify them. And so this is the 2025 timeline. If you're interested in participating in this working group, I have a different sign-in sheet for you. So you all hopefully signed in at the back that said, I'm interested in, or I'm here physically. But then if you want an application, you can write your name and your email, or your name and your mailing address, and we will get you an application. We will also have applications on the project website. So they'll be up there as well. And then we're also going to send out a press release within the next week or two that basically invites anyone to come join and participate in this working group as well. So you can forward around that email. Again, however you want to get the word out, we're really leaning on, and we'll reach out to people as well. I'm really leaning on you all to say like, okay, like I think so-and-so should be on this working group. I'll forward it to them. And so we're really hoping for a broad representation of users to participate in this working group. And now you might be asking, what does this entail? I don't really know if I want to sign up, but you should. It will be great. So the plan is to have 5 to 6 meetings throughout 2026 and 2027. The first meeting would be in January of 2026 with ample notice, and making sure that in that meeting, we will then schedule out all of the subsequent meetings for the next year. So if it's folks from, anyway, just making sure that we can accommodate as many schedules as we can. And so what we're really asking for in this working group is to make sure we're asking for your time to do cross-interest learning to understand the whole picture of what we're managing for. Yes, and they'll be in Ridgefield. Yes, thank you. Sorry. The meetings will be held at the Ridgefield office. Yeah, so we're looking for your willingness to understand the whole picture of what we're working to manage. For you to also provide input on draft alternatives, on draft criteria to compare these alternatives with. So what should we be thinking about is that, obviously we're thinking about our policies, but costs and funding, community values, and then input on the application of those criteria to these various alternatives that we're going to develop with this working group, right? So really trying to incorporate your input throughout the entire process. The biggest thing that we're looking for out of this working group are ideas for maximizing multiple stakeholder values within each of these alternatives, right? And so we're hoping you come and are thinking creatively and have open minds to kind of say like, that's good, but have you thought about adding this to make it even better for the special interest group that I'm representing? And so that's what we're really hoping for. And that's kind of the 26, 27 time frame. So again, none of this is happening fast. Through the state government, we're working our way through a process. We'll hope to have a preferred alternative in early 27, so a year and a half from now. And we really would like your involvement and your input and your participation in that process. And we've also talked about different ways to engage people who don't want to be a part of the working group, but still want to hear what's going on. And again, that's us being happy to come to whatever group it is that you are in. We are happy to give presentations, have public meetings throughout this process, providing updates, we'll have, again, the project website, which is up and running, and we'll provide notes and minutes and the agendas so that everyone can make sure that they're tracking, even if they're not a part of the working group specifically. And so again, there's numerous ways to get involved, and we're really open to feedback on how we can make this process more transparent and more inclusive. Because I'm keeping you updated through the website and public meetings. And I'm also happy to have a cup of coffee with anyone. So happy to, my number's there, my email's there as well. And so please feel free to reach out if you have questions. Feel free to reach out to Zach as well. Honestly, anyone in this room is happy to field your questions. And with that, we will go ahead and take questions. Thank you. Oh, yes. And yeah, we'll start in the room, and then we'll jump to virtual if there's any virtual folks that have questions. And if you do, just raise your hand virtually. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Pat Miller, and I'm a retired district wildlife biologist. I have a couple questions, but I'll just a couple important ones, at least to me. We have an invasive species policy in the agency, and carp, part of that mechanism might this project have to keep the carp from invading new areas?
That's a great question, and I think that would be one of the criteria to evaluate under. So again, we don't have a lot of answers because it's the planning process, but I think that would be a great thing to consider. And I saw Britton already taking notes. And yeah, that's something I know we've thought about in the past. And so I think it is just thinking through that with the various criteria and seeing which of the alternatives would provide that more, if that makes sense. So yes, yeah, I appreciate that point. Be part of the process. Thank you. Don.
Dan Lawson. I'm with Vancouver Wildlife League, and I participate with the pheasant release program. How much of the land in the South Unit will be lost to inundation and no longer usable for pheasant hunting?
I would answer similarly in that we don't know until we go through this process, but pheasant hunting is also typically in the fall when the river levels are lower. So I don't see it as being an issue, but again, I can't confirm that because we don't know the elevation that we would breach the levee to until we go through the process. But yeah, for the most part in the fall, the river's not going to be very beneficial for fish at that point anyway, because it's also juvenile salmon, which are coming down typically in like that February, March, April, May, June time period, like with the freshet and the higher water levels. And so, there wouldn't be a reason to go down to fall water levels.
Yeah, the current setup, we don't typically turn the pumps on and pump any significant or meaningful water until December, which is probably about the same time it would start coming up and flooding into the Shillapoo naturally. So yeah, it's still too early to tell, but I would suspect not a whole lot of change for pheasant season.
Yes, hi.
My name's Paul Smith. I'm also with the Vancouver Wildlife League. So with this this is similar to what you've done with Steigerwald, correct?
Steigerwald was done by Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership and the U.S. Fish Wildlife, but it is a similar concept, yes, in terms of floodplain reconnection.
Right.
Yeah,
Not-
yeah.
Not the folks, sorry.
Yeah, no, that was like, oh, we
US
didn't do
Fish
it.
Wildlife,
Yes, yeah.
But I live east of there. And so I used to drive by there twice a day when I used to work, and there's been a noticeable, huge increase in egrets and fish-eating birds like pelicans. And I don't know if there's any numbers on that, as well as what kind of predaceous fish are coming in to eat any of those, sort of the smolts, right?
Mhm.
So this same thing can possibly happen, but what's the likelihood that, yes, the fish were obviously much smaller that were in the river versus being able to have a estuary, uprigging. That if this didn't happen, then those fish wouldn't have been targeted.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the specifics. I know it also provides more refuge as well, like with vegetation cover and all of these different pieces, right? So, I mean, again, I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are on Steigerwald. I know for warm water fish, most of the time, so we did a restoration project at South Bachelor Island where we reconnected a historic, it wasn't historic, it was a dredge made pond that filled in, and we reconnected that. And we see that fish are out of there pretty much before temperatures get to a point where warm water fish are coming in to feed. And so, we don't really see the overlap there, just mainly because these fish are typically out before the temperatures get such that warm water fish come in.
Except for the predation birds.
Except for the birds, yeah. And again, I'm not 100% sure on the bird seasons. But yeah, I think that, again, that's another criteria to kind of think through. And I feel like a lot of the answers, I'm like, that's a good point. Like, let's think about that. And again, that's why we want this input, is to like, what should we be thinking about? What do we need to be incorporating? And yeah, especially if there are specific examples where we could pull from the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership and say, hey, have you guys been tracking this? Like, what are you actually seeing in terms of fish use versus predation, and seeing if we could pull some of that information from that. So I appreciate, thanks, Paul.
So you mentioned that you're hoping to raise water levels and flood out invasive plant species and then have native plant species. What would be the seed source for the native plant?
Right. So currently we do a lot of moist soil management down in Shillapoo, and we've never brought in any native seeds or put any native seeds out ourselves. The seed bank down there is pretty phenomenal. I mean, if you go in, you spray out the wetland like we do, spray it, go in and disc it. We flood it for a season, with the winter season, and then when the water draws down, the wetland plant community or the native community comes back pretty well without any input. So the hope would be that even if we do the scrape down, there would be enough of that native seed bank that it would come back and fill in.
So when you do what you described, what's its impact on like reed canary?
The current management, like moist soil management, yeah, we'll go in and we'll spray it out with say glyphosate, and we usually get about 5 years on average out of 5-year cycle before the reed canary comes back and is so dominant that we kind of have to start that process over. Yeah, the hope is with the project that maybe we can get a better water cycle or a deeper depth, that it will prolong that or lessen the need to do all the moist soil management that we currently do.
I was gonna say, additionally, the partners in the Lower Columbia that are working to do a lot of these, like Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership with Steigerwald, for example, or Columbia Land Trust, there's been a lot of research and work done on trying to manage the reed canary grass, both prior to floodplain reconnection and then kind of how you manage it afterwards. And so there's a whole body of work and a number of papers that have been written in the past few years that are really addressing what some of the best management practices are prior to a restoration project and how to really work to treat it, what elevations in terms of like elevations relative to NAPD 88 are the best for these species. Like when do you get mud flat, when do you get reed canary grass, and when can you get the native band in between those two things? So there's just been a lot of work lately around what the best management practices are for that we would also be considering as part of these criteria.
Yeah, we've had really good results in the wetlands that we've been able to enhance and have a better water regime like North Basin or South Cell. Since I've been here, it's almost 5 years, we haven't had to touch either one of those. So the hope would be that hopefully we can design a project that would mimic those results on those wetlands.
There'd be some sort of operations and maintenance that would have to be plugged into a project like this, good to be viable over the long.
Yes. Agreed. I saw you were raising your hand. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a user of the property down here for 56 years. So if we're to look at where it's going to look like in December now compared to what your vision is, as a layman, what am I going to see different?
Yeah, I mean, like we said, a lot of that stuff's to be hashed out, but I mean,
A lot more water, a lot more of the land covered with water, deeper water.
yeah, it's hard to say at this point. I mean, yeah, I would love to see more water and think that in certain ways that a reconnection will possibly see more water than our current setup.
And is farming still going to be allowed on that property?
Yeah, we don't have any intentions of ending any of that.
Okay,
So
for that, bring in waterfowl too.
And we have an agricultural stakeholder
Right.
seat on there as well to provide that context. And again, the blind spots that we're missing around that are not thinking about.
yeah, for me as the manager, it's very helpful to have them on the landscape anyway. And plus, it's part of our mission statement, so it just lessens the cost that we have to manage the area if they're down there doing their thing. So
You and then Ian.
So you had a slide that said in 2018 you paused for 6 or 7 years because of public perception and difficulty reaching compromise. What was that all about?
I think there wasn't a lot of positive press around the project. It was an assumption that we weren't thinking about waterfowl and weren't taking in waterfowl considerations and public recreation into the project process. I think we felt that we were trying and we just couldn't come up with a compromise around something that worked for everyone. And again, none of it's going to be perfect, but we're trying to kind of add some flexibility into this iteration that maybe wasn't there before to try to reach that compromise. And we were getting there. We were on the road to that as in 2017, 18. And then again, a series of things in the world sort of shifted. And so it all paused. And so
I know, what was that? I'm still confused. And how would this have been a negative for water?
I was gonna say, does somebody else want to answer that one just from?
Yeah, so I think before was the design of the concept that we were looking at, the positive drainage. And the impact was coming from water valve and wildlife in general, where that ponding was on the landscape. Like to see a pretty big decrease in waterfowl populations and doing things of that nature. So that was kind of where the Habitat program, wildlife program disagreed a little bit on the project as far as, okay, you have salmon on the landscape. How's that affect everything else? We're seeing that a project that happens positive drainage kind of had a lot of impacts to waterfowl and hunting. I think that was the disagreement now that compromise is, you come to like a hyper approach, like you were said, like, oh, sweat ponding, maybe sweat pumps. We have different connection levels straight down where you still have that, like habitat. I think that's the big difference. Question.
Well, so, but wasn't it a flooding, proposal last time? So why would there be dewatering if it being negative to water level?
So is the positive drainage, so where you don't have fish and traffic last time. So basically, the wetlands would not be necessarily already inundated with the tide. They're a little elevated, not a wetland that's down here that you can see water every day. So a certain level of water to get onto the water. So without having that ponding, that storage of water, with pond drainage is kind of a tip.
Ian.
Ian, thanks to the Columbia Land Trust, we own the land to the south, we call Queen's Landing. I think what I recall from some of the conversations also was that the hunting opportunity would be a lot less predictable and so harder to plan around and maybe actually detrimental. That wasn't better than that wasn't determined. It's not what I wanted to ask. You have an engineering team, and so are you viewing this group that's meeting periodically as kind of a working group where there's just so many questions and different variables and different levers and buttons to push and pull and try and figure out if your engineering team can be interacting, providing kind of feedback from questions real time?
Yeah, the intent, so because there's such a history, yes, there's been like a lot of modeling, a lot of data collection, a lot of assessments on the vegetation, on waterfowl use, and again, like carrying capacities for juvenile salmon to figure out how many could potentially utilize this area. So we feel like we are inundated in the amount of data that we have. And so we're trying to figure out kind of exactly how to not drown in the data that we have, but still get the key points across throughout the working group. And so, yeah, we will be kind of like taking time between each working group to answer the questions, to, as people bring up specific things, taking it back to our subject matter experts, whether that's our wildlife, our lands management teams, like, Zach and Darren and that team, whether it's our invasive species team, where we can evaluate, what the different invasive species are, whether it's our waterfowl section, our fish science section, our habitat science section, our engineering team as well, really making sure that like in between the meetings, our agency is doing our homework to answer the questions and fill in the gaps that came up through the working group, so that the next working group, we can bring those answers back and say, yes, like, look, if we do, if we cut down to this elevation, not necessarily specifics, but if we have a higher breach elevation versus a lower breach elevation, here's like the expectations of what each of those outcomes will be. So yeah, it'll be kind of a balance of not having too much technical, but also recognizing we have a lot of data and we have a lot of really interested and smart folks at the agency that they're the subject matter experts on a lot of these things. And so balancing the expertise of our agency and the expertise of our working group members and seeing how we can make the best project possible, essentially. I say the best possible, that's like my head, the best possible. But yeah. Does that answer the question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm really concerned with this project from a global warming point of view, because we're losing the glaciers, river flows are all dropping year round, not just spring, summer, and how are you going to design around that? You can't use the past river flows because those are no longer applicable. And so you're designing a project that's related to the river level, but we don't know what that river level is going to be. I mean, you can maybe guess at it, but we don't have any data to support that. And so your chances of actually designing a successful project, you know, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Because you don't know how much of effect global warming is going to be. It's just kicking in right now. You know, within the next, by the time you're ready to go to the project, then you probably will understand the river flows as they will be in the future. And you've already got the project designed. So, you know, I just see this as untimely as far as global warming goes.
Yeah, all of our projects, and honestly, a lot of funders at this point for restoration projects, you know, make you incorporate climate change resiliency. So how is your project going to stand up to climate change? And so a lot of that, again, thinking about the folks that we have on staff, we have, you know, a series of climate change reports. We have expectations for the Columbia coming up, you know, and again, that's obviously considering a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns, and also a lot of like dam operations, right? So it's not just how much rainfall are you predicted to get, it's what's the Army Corps going to do with that, you know, with that information. And so I would say it's definitely, it's going to be one of the criteria, and it's something that we're strongly considering, and all of our projects, we really aim to make as climate resilient as possible. And our engineer have a hand up to respond as well.
I just want to say that that's a really good thought and question. And your concerns apply not only to a future where there's a potentially a restoration project out there, but they apply to how we will manage the wildlife areas in the future. And an example of that is the current pumping system is only comes active when the river stages up to a certain elevation. And if, like you say, there are changes to the river that cause those elevations to be lower, that will really affect it will affect the ability for us to manage the wildlife area just with the existing infrastructure. So it's a great question, and it's really important for us to consider that as we move forward here.
So,
Yeah, but most of the river, the water controlled on the Columbia is controlled by Canada. That's where most of the water from the Columbia comes, is from Canada, not from the United States. And so they're having the same problems we are, and so they are not going to be releasing water like they did in the past. And they have primarily most of the flood storage on the Columbia River. They have that huge dam up there. And, you know, if they start pulling back on that, and my understanding is that the Corps and Bonneville Power and Canada have not come to an agreement. That agreement expired, I don't know, several years ago, and they've been negotiating, but they haven't come to an agreement. And so how much water are we going to get from Canada? You know, that's a big question mark, because most of the water is there. It's not here.
It's definitely, yeah, I mean, that is definitely one of the criteria and uncertainties to, I think, include in the whole conversation around what does the future look like and what does the future project look like,
Yeah.
for sure.
So,
Mhm.
I mean, I think those are some things that need to be finalized before you move into the project. Because you can't do a design if you don't know what the criteria is going to be. I don't know what Bonneville's position is. I know they tried to get the agreement and they haven't been successful.
Yeah,
But that's a big consideration is that where that water is going to be coming from and how much it is going to come down there.
Yeah.
Global warming is going to have a much bigger effect east of the Cascades than it is west of the Cascades. And the source of the Columbia is on the east side.
yeah. And again, that's definitely a criteria to evaluate and to see again where it is when we get to where we're at throughout this process, for sure.
Well,
No, I appreciate that.
except I don't see you moving up, solving those problems at the beginning of your study.
Right.
That's what I don't.
Yeah, no, again, I think it's an uncertainty. We put it in the uncertainty box of criteria to consider, to think about.
Am I correct in understanding that you plan on breaching the levee so that fish can swim out of the Columbia and into these sloughs and shallow areas?
Yes,
Are they going to be fry, par, smolts? What do you expect?
juveniles primarily, coming from, again, they're primarily juvenile fall Chinook, local, but also from mid and upper Columbia.
Smolts. Oh, okay. Bigger than smolts?
Well, they're typically par, but they're not. When juvenile salmon begin to get into the intermixing zone with the salt, then they begin to go into the smoltification process. So these are pre-smolts. These are really small sub-yearling 40 millimeter up to 80 millimeter par, juvenile par. So they haven't smolted yet. They're moving down slowly down the river, rearing and feeding and growing before they smolt in the salt mixing zone. Basically.
Is there enough oxygen content in this water to sustain these fish?
Again, in theory, yes, yeah, like especially as the water's high, it's up, it's up and moving. So when it's fully connected, the intent, yes, there would be enough. A question that we're part of our criteria that we're looking at is fish stranding, right? So like as the water comes down and it's trapped for waterfowl and for native plant management, it would be thinking about potentially how long those fish would be in there for before the river comes back up. If the river comes back up, those are all kind of considerations around like the elevation with which we do that, and potentially also whether or not we add pumps to potentially pump them out of there if the river never comes back up, right? And so most years, again, it kind of is high and then drops down in February and then comes back up for the freshet. But again, there are definitely instances where it does not come back up. And so, that's one of the reasons why we're also looking at potentially having a pumping system to, help with waterfowl management piece of it, but that would also potentially help with juvenile salmon if the river doesn't get back up to where it's connected again and those juveniles are trapped. Whereas with the freshet, typically what happens with the juveniles is they'll kind of make their way out with the temperatures, right? So by the time the freshet starts dropping, they're getting warm, they're cued to get out of there, right? But our issue would really just be if the freshet didn't hit that elevation and didn't reconnect it for the final time for that season, if that makes sense. Are there any questions online, Britton?
Don't want to let them know how they may raise their hand. Experience folks jointly.
Yeah, so if anyone online has any questions, if you want to raise your hand virtually, we can help you talk. That is through that icon right there, the little high five. If you just want to raise your hand through that and ask questions, and Britton will unmute you to ask it. And if it's a mobile device, you click the three dots at the bottom of your screen and then select raise your hand. So that's your options if you want to raise your hand on your phone or on your laptop. Just want to make sure they feel. Yes.
Has the viability of Steigerwald, which is a similar concept, been tested using electroshock or seine netting?
Actually, Alex knows. There we go. That's why we have the team.
So we talked a bit about the South Pastor Island project, which is just localized a mile from here, right here on the river. Downstream, obviously, from Steigerwald, but we completed that project, like Laura said, in 2020. And like Laura mentioned, we connected a remnant pond, dug a channel between that remnant pond, produced dredge material to the Columbia River main stem. The following winter, we went in and started sampling fish. We used the beach seine. And we started in February. We went out every 3 weeks until June, until the water was too warm. And for salmon to be there. And when the water was warm, we swept the nets through the water. We found very, very few salmon. The juvenile salmon we did find were out in the main stem when the water was cooler. So, but we found all throughout that sampling season, that spring, again, going out every 3 weeks, February to May and June, we found just a lot of juvenile salmon using that site. And what we really wanted to know was, to answer the basic question like you asked, are fish using it? And the definitive answer there was, yes, they are. But one thing you have to remember is that, sites like this are always evolving. That's kind of the way nature works. Change is always happening, and vegetation grows, channel forms can change, floods can move material around, and a key question here is how is a site like this going to form or function not only immediately after it's done, like we looked at, but into the future. So those are different questions, and they're important questions for every restoration site. But what we found at that site was that, yes, immediately after constructing the project, juvenile salmonids were using it and rearing in the vegetation and growing. So those basic questions we answered. And I'm not sure about Steigerwald. I'm sure that North Columbia Partnership is doing the same thing there. And if you're interested in the results of their sampling, I'm sure they'd be more than willing to share those with you. If you are interested.
And overall too, so again, a number of studies have been done in the Lower Columbia in particular, but also on, across the Pacific Northwest around floodplain reconnection. And pretty much the answer is when you open it back up, they come in almost immediately. And again, the follow-up of them then getting out to the ocean and being healthier and bigger. And, so the connection between what you do today is not immediate in your fish returns next year, right? Because it takes a long time for them to get out there and hopefully come back. So that's where it's harder to track the progress of the adult returns. But again, the theory is that if they go out healthier and bigger, which we know that they will, and use the areas as habitat almost immediately, first season available, they'll go out healthier.
So, did you find increased bird predation? So egrets, blue herons, and definitely pelicans.
We didn't do a study of it. We saw no indication that it was more or less or after.
And I was going to say too, they've done some projects. So there was, and this was done by U.S. Geological Survey and the Army Corps and the Pacific National, what's the second? Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Sorry, I knew I was missing that middle in there. And they've done studies, and this is more on like some of the dredge material work, but they're also very concerned about increased avian predation. And so I've done a series of monitoring years where they've looked at some restoration projects that they've done through dredge material, but also haven't seen an increase in predation of avian. Those habitats.
But referring to some of the studies that have done the Lower River, the Sand Island, that Florida has done,
Well, I literally first year immediately saw a huge increase in pelicans, egrets at the start, and it continued. Then there were it's been, I don't know, 6 years ago or so, but there were some years where there was less. And I also noticed the pelicans, they stop for a few weeks and then go back. So obviously the numbers are gargantuan, up by John Day in the summer. It's crazy. The numbers of pelicans up there. And in different sections of the Bonneville or the Columbia groups.
Yeah, and saying too, like, as Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, like, we're pretty okay with blue herons and egrets, like, that also is one of our goals, right? So kind of the interactions there is not necessarily what we're super concerned about. We're providing the habitat for the juveniles, and then, we also see the benefits of having birds and having the birds utilize our wildlife area as well.
No, but that's a negative. Those birds are all predaceous, especially for any small 8-inch fish. The pelican just can pound those.
Yeah, pelicans for sure. And I know the herons can as well, but I'm just saying, like, it still meets our mission to have, again, maybe not necessarily pelicans, but having the other wetland species present. Well, we're kind of trying to balance all the various pieces of our mission, wading birds.
Okay. I'm thinking that one of the differences between a hatchery raised fry and one that's raised in the wild is that the wild fish has to survive from a lot of threats. And that would be happening in this new area that you're creating. So could it also, if you didn't get enough natural baby fish coming in, could a hatchery raise some up to fry level and then transfer them?
Maybe missing, like just dropping fish in there.
Yeah. And now you don't have the cost of feeding them because there's a lot of feed that they can find.
Yeah, I'm most definitely not speaking for our fish program. I do not know.
And there's steelhead hatcheries that are being shut down. So
right.
There would possibly be hatcheries that could be used to bring them up to a certain age.
I mean, this project would benefit, again, both hatchery and natural or wild fish. So I'm not sure about how to interact, but again, it could be something to think about for sure.
All right.
Well, with that, give you a minute to marinate and think about it, but yeah, with that, I really just want to say, like, the key thing of this is getting input, and is getting public input, getting tribal input, getting landowner input, and really kind of trying to look at this as holistically as possible. Think through all of our diverse stakeholder needs and thinking about all the different things that we ask of our wildlife areas, especially in an ever changing and rapidly developing portion of Washington, right? So really trying to think of how we can have the highest benefit for all of our stakeholder groups in a single project, and recognizing that that's going to involve a little bit of change and but also hopefully some potential benefits and opportunities. And so we're really asking for your feedback, for your participation, and for your input along the way. And whether that is, again, sending me an email saying, Laura, I got a lot of concerns. Do you have an hour to chat? Sure. Hey, we're, just really think about how this process can go to make everyone, to kind of bring everybody along and be as transparent as possible in this process. And so we're starting again with this working group. Like I said, you signed up back there to just say that we're here, so thank you. If you want to be a part of the working group, we will email you an application. I'm going to put this piece of paper right here on the right, so you can sign up, put your name, your email, or your mailing address. And like I said, the timeline, I'll leave the timeline up, but the timeline for that is essentially, there it is. Okay. So we'll open the applications, have them open for a couple months, just, send them to your friends and around, and then just get them back to us in some way, shape, or form. And then October to November, we'll review all the applicants and notify and schedule a meeting for January, of which we will then start the working group process and start these meetings and kind of give more information to the people who are in the working group, and to make sure too that the public is also engaged and tracking as we move through this process. So I will set this up right here. And I saw you, was this a question?
Kind of an overview of
Okay, yeah.
why all these guys know me, and I just
Yeah.
to help everybody in the room.
Yeah.
And I get it, you're trying to set up a process. But some of these questions, no one can answer, say, just like what you're doing. So I would suggest you get your staff or your engineers in the next presentation, you come in and say, from what I'm hearing, yes, we're gonna do plan 3, call it, the bottom one. And we're gonna go ahead because we recognize the water levels, that no matter what, this project has pumps. Actually, it was a great thing for a safety valve. And then we can all do the AI and the computer stuff that I don't do. Don't laugh, everybody behind me, and say, well, we're gonna flood it and it's gonna take 70%. That's your guess, it's not in stone. And say, if we did 70% of this was flooded, what impacts that on the waterfowl? What impact is it on there? Is the water is gonna be 70% from this month to this month. This is the birds that use the area. This is what'll be affected. The water will drain down to 40% at this time of year. This is what's there. Is this acceptable to all the groups? Just like when the gentleman's asking about the pheasant hunting. Well, if the water's not up and that land's there, you can walk and utilize it, or bird watchers or people want to fish, whatever. But when we have this meeting now, it's the start. So I'm going to the next level. So when you have the next level and you have 2 months, your staff has time to make models and they can put them up there. This is what our staff and our engineers say will happen if we do this. This was what will happen. That way you'll get input from us as users to say, well, that one, if you do that, well, that's too flooded too long because the, I don't know, snow geese fly in and they're not gonna have a play or whatever it is. The main goal is to have fish, but the main goal is of all of us to work together and have a project. What you're saying, right, is it'll benefit. And even though we don't want to hear it, and guys before carps, whatever, yeah, we don't really want that, but the herons, you know, it's gonna feed them, but we gotta feed the herons, have more heron. We all have to work together. Mother Nature doesn't say, I'm gonna have the deer, you all stay on this side of the road, and the bear on this side, and elk here. We can't control Mother Nature. We can't control the weather. We can't control how much water we can guess. And anybody in this room, if there's somebody that can actually tell them, you should be working for them, because no one in this room can say, we're not gonna have 100-year flood. We don't know. We could have an earthquake. So there's so many variables what they're saying, but to get this project and what you want to do, you need to kind of have some models and go 1, 2, and 3 would be my suggestion. I'm not doing it, but that's my 2 cents for today.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the plan. I mean, that's what the intent of the working group is to work through what those look like, answer those questions, and get to that point with a smaller group of people that then report back out to their broader community to kind of get that more valuable input.
Yeah, right now, our concept is still fairly vague. We need to narrow down some of the parameters, such as what range of elevation are we looking at? And then we can start doing modeling. Like, okay, we've got to narrow down to these scenarios. What do these scenarios look like?
But yes, that is very much the next step. So I appreciate that. Yeah. So with that, if you're interested in having those conversations and joining the working group, please sign up on that sheet right there. I'll grab some pins. They're all in the back. Ashley's going to bring some pins up forward. Perfect. Thank you. And again, we're here. Again, anyone who's got a DFW logo knows about this project and can talk about this project. So again, if you kind of have some more questions and you want to linger, we've got a team of folks here that can answer some questions if you didn't want to ask them in front of the group. So I really appreciate your time tonight. I know it's an ask to come out and participate, but this is really how we get the good projects done and working together. So I really appreciate everyone's time. Yes, sir.
If you have the people come to be on this group might help if you had a time, like it could be at 5, some people work. I mean, it's a perfect world, everyone can come at noon when you work, but they're
Yeah,
volunteers. so
we
that's
have-
critical.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we have. So on the application, we kind of have like a what time works best for you. So then we can kind of understand the scope of what works for the majority of the people, and we'll work to schedule those meetings. Like the first one will be January, but we'll work to schedule those meetings in a way that accommodates the majority, if not all of the work. Yeah, we want as much participation as we can have.
Different groups, guys. You don't need 6 guys for my club on it.
Y'all pick. Awesome. All right, well, thank you all so much, and please take cookies and sodas and whatever you need to get yourselves home tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you.